Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market.
Good morning, David. And we are today on podcast number 16. Time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, it really does. It really does. That's 15 hours of content or so, or approximately an hour each already there. I hope people are taking advantage of it and listening to it, some of it, find topics people like, and we certainly having fun doing it. So hopefully people are getting as much benefit out of this as we are.
Absolutely. It's been a lot of fun and a lot of amazing content, David, and then tapping into your firm's expertise and hearing a lot about the pain points here that we're experiencing at the brokerage, and then talking about them, discussing them on a regular basis, and talking about the trends in the industry. Certainly, not only has been fun, but hopefully it's been very educational for everybody listening as well.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think the education starts with us, because I think we both learn from each other and what's going on at our my firm, at your brokerage, because we always reflect on how things are affecting our own businesses and us as owners of businesses, and that's an important part of this too. And the same thing for the listeners, agents. Every agent is in business for themselves, and so they've got to think about it, not just how they help their clients, but how are these things affecting their own business and their own opportunities. Same thing with the people looking at legal issues. So anyways, it's some of these discussions I think are very worthwhile, and we're certainly learning ourselves from it, and we hope that others can get a benefit too.
That's a great point, David. And I mean, our philosophy has always been to lead by example. So, I mean, this podcast is very much that. I want to encourage my agents to start a podcast. I want my agents to be leaders in their respective communities. And, this has been a learning curve and a little bit of a different aspect for you and I, but it's been great. And it's been a great experience. And I think we're both really enjoying this experience. And our message to our audience is, step outside your comfort zone and, really do things to push business development to different levels and experiment. And there's so many different technologies. Like before, like your phone is probably one of the most powerful publishing devices that there ever was. You can create a TikTok video and get 10,000 views. You can create a podcast and all of a sudden be syndicated on all these channels. And, I'm driving my car, I press my button and I say, play the David and David on Real Estate podcast. And right away, it pulls it up on my screen. And it's really extraordinary that we have that kind of reach possibilities with a device like our phone.
Yeah, no, it's really something. And so it's fun to be part of this, and and part of it, you start it, and some people question, well, who's going to be listening, and how's it going to benefit your law firm, and how's it going to benefit Sutton Summit and their agents? And the reality is, like, there'll be benefits internally, but we're also offering this up for anybody. So brokerages that are competing with you, agents that aren't with you right now are listening to it. Law firms, other lawyers that we basically compete with are listening to it and might get the benefit of some of the things that we say as well. But that's fine, because like you said, we want to be leaders in the industry.
100%.
And I know when I'm doing a transaction, I want a good lawyer on the other side. I used to say the other side of the table. We used to actually meet in person and they'd be on the other side of the table, but it's the other side of the file now. And you want someone good there and someone competent to deal with. It's not like you expect to get 100% of the market. You always have to share the market, but it's good to educate each other and raise the bar in our
100%.
Businesses.
Yeah. And I think when you and I first talked about doing this, I mean, that was really the motivation behind this, right? We talked about, how much training our respective offices do together, right? And the whole idea was, how can we leverage that and give bigger benefit to the overall industry? And instead of you coming in for an hour and training my agents, we're like, okay, well, let's do it in a more digital platform that can have more broader reach, and we can engage with more people. And that was the whole idea of this. And I'm really excited about what we're doing, and I really look forward to continuing these.
Yeah, and while we're doing it, we're creating a library, so people can look us up, find out what the topics are, but there's always some discussion of market conditions and something that may not be identified in the general topic, but every week there's some topic that hopefully will be of interest, and they can access it whenever they want. So it's nice to create a library like this too. So hopefully people take advantage of it.
Absolutely. So October 2021, let's jump into a little bit of a market update. So we are seeing still an extremely strong seller's market. And we are seeing a few more properties come on the market, but by no means historically what we should be seeing this time of the year. So number of showings are up about 10% month over month. And when I say month over month, I'm comparing the last 30 days of 2021 to 2020. Year over year, we're seeing number of showings up 52%, right? Which seems like a high number, but again, it was COVID in 2020, so people weren't leaving the house and they weren't showing properties. Excuse me for 1 second.
So does that keep track showing number? Does that include virtual showings? There's record of all virtual showings as well in that number?
No. So virtual showings, happen at any time. People can always go into a virtual open house and tour the house as many times as they want. And that wouldn't be counted in these numbers. These numbers is when an agent physically booked a showing and we released the logbox for him to enter the property.
Right. So we know that, during COVID, there still were physical showings, but there were a lot of people that are doing, a lot of what they would have otherwise done as physical showings, they're doing online to take their first look at a property sometimes too. So there's actually more showings out there than what these numbers reflect.
Oh, 100%. If you're a buyer and you're interested in a property, chances are you're probably looking at it, 10, 15, 20 times in a day. And, you're looking at the virtual tour, you're looking at the pictures, you're looking at Google satellite imagery, right? There's a lot of information available to buyers, and buyers we're seeing are really tapping into those sources of information in a really big way to really get to know the property, to get to know the neighborhood, to get to know crime rates, and to get to know, different communities and different parks and who their prospective neighbors are. So, all this technology is available, and we're seeing buyers really utilize it in a big way.
Okay, but you as an agent, and when you're advising your other agents, are you still encouraging people, that have gone online, they've looked at the property, they either like it or they don't like it, or they might say, well, I'm prepared to pass on this one from what I've seen online. Are you still encouraging them, though, like we should go and take a physical look at it because you don't see it quite the same way online?
Of course. And, that's of course, the advice. Seeing the property in person is really important. You're always going to get a very different perspective, but it's also market specific and market driven, right? And we're seeing more and more properties be sold virtually without actually booking an appointment. And it's also a timing issue of how quickly our market is moving as well. So we are seeing, properties come up, and if they're not holding offers, offers are coming in without viewings, and people are trying to use whatever they can to give themselves an edge and be able to secure the properties. But we're also feeling a lot of buyer frustration nowadays as well, because of the multiple offers going on and because of the prices being driven up. And a lot of buyers are just, not catching up to the market, which poses a really big issue as well.
Yeah, but I think it makes sense, like just logical sense for you to encourage people to actually attend at a proper one, especially when they're interested. Like staging is so good right now. And, like the stagers are really, really good. The photography is fabulous. The videos that they do, the virtual tours is so good. And they know how the angles to take it. Everything is at its absolute best. Every room looks twice the size that it actually is. Right. So you really, to some degree, you got to get into the property, the physical property, to get a real feel for what a house is all about. It's different from from looking at it virtually. And I can just tell you, my background's not in sales, but I've maybe mentioned this before. My father was a fabulous salesman. He was at menswear business. And he used to talk about, someone would come into the store to buy a suit, and they'd be looking at the sleeves of the suits, and maybe they might be pulling up a sleeve to take a look at a price, or they're just feeling the fabric on a suit. And my father would always say the key to selling a suit is you got to get it on the person. And he'd go over to someone and say, are you here to buy a sleeve, or are you here to buy a suit or a sports jacket? You got to put it on, see how it looks on you. Everything looks good on the shelf. They all look like navy blue suits. There's 12 of them, but how do you know which one's going to fit you, which one might look good on you, or maybe it won't? But once you get it on them, the sale is almost made. Okay, because they're going to feel good. They're going to look in the mirror. They like this new jacket on. That one may not fit. They may have to go to the next one. But once you get them to take off the jacket they're wearing and put a jacket on their back, my father always said he's got the sale made. And that always stuck with me, even though I'm not in sales. But the same principle would apply. You got to get buyers into a house to see the actual house. Otherwise, online, sometimes they're just looking at sleeves. They're just looking at something and they're just passing on the sleeve, and not trying on the jacket. You got to get into the house. Once you're in the house, they fall in love with the house, or
100%. They
or they fall out
emotionally
of love,
attached.
or they fall out of love, right? They see the warts that are hidden on a virtual tour.
Yeah, and I mean, that emotional connection is really, really important, right? And it's the same concept in menswear. Try on the jacket, see how it fits, look in the mirror, and it's the same when touring a house. When you walk to that door, and you get that feeling that you're home, right? You almost know instantly if it's the right property, if
Right.
the neighborhood feels right, if walking up to the front door feels right. We spend such a great deal of time in the home. It's our safety net. It's our sanctuary. It's our place on earth that is our own, right? And it's so important to have that emotional connection with the place where you live.
And I think that's it. When you're buying a place, at some point, a buyer stands in the house in one of the rooms somewhere and it says, can I live here? Is this going to be my home? It's not a house. Is this going to be my home? Is this where my children are going to be raised? Is this the community I want to live in? Is that the school they're going to go to? Is this the park I'm going to take my kids to play on the swings, right? You have that emotional connection. It either feels right or it doesn't, right? If it feels right, then you want to pay to get it, right? You'll pay the price to get it and do what it takes to get it. You'll listen, hopefully, to the advice of your real estate agent, who's going to guide you through a competitive bidding type of market.
Yeah. And listen, it's definitely competitive out there. We're seeing the number of sold and leased properties up 4% month over month, 27% year over year. We're also seeing the number of new listings up, which this is a key indicator to me. So year over year, we're seeing new listings up 8%. Month over month, we're seeing the listings up 21%. So this is a fabulous indicator that, we are starting to see a little bit more inventory out there. Now, 21%, again, I want to talk about that number because it seems high, but you have to remember that it's from an extremely low number the previous month. So the previous month, we also almost saw no new listings come on the market.
Right.
Now we're seeing a 21% increase, but let's say 10 houses got listed in September. Well, if 12 houses get listed this month, that's a 21% increase, right?
Right.
So
right.
you have to kind of look at that number and understand it. We're still relatively low compared to the historical average of how many listings we're supposed to see in the fall time. We're supposed to see a lot more listings coming into the market. We are seeing it trend upwards, but nowhere near where I'd like the market to the number to be for the market to be a little bit more balanced out there. It's still a very strong seller's market. We're still seeing a lot of multiples. We're still seeing prices go, $50,000, $100,000, $150,000 over asking, and we're seeing it happen on a daily basis.
Yeah, and that's a fabulous explanation, David, because statistics can be misleading, and you take the time to analyze what's behind the numbers, and 0 times 10 is still 0. And you have to know that. And it's still a relatively soft market. It's great that there's a trend, that it's going up as opposed to going down. But like you said, it's a pretty low bar for it to climb over right now.
Right.
So for a typical fall, for a typical early October, we're definitely down on what a typical year would be, because late August, September, we're really down, but at least it's trending upward. So at least it's going in the right direction, but we're feeling it. We know it's definitely quieter out there. Like our volumes of transactions coming up for October, November, December are on the low side. I don't know if we'll reach previous year's numbers. Right now, I sort of doubt it. So, we feel that lag behind your transactions.
Yeah, and we're still busy on the brokerage level. Like we're still processing on a large number of transactions, but I'm seeing that the trend is that people are going further and further outside of the GTA, right? So Brantford, we're seeing Hamilton, St. Catharines, Barrie, Oshawa, right? So people are going out and purchasing property where it's priced a little bit cheaper.
Yeah, and getting away from the lake. We took a drive last week. My wife and I, we drove out to. Well, we sort of started out in Hamilton. Went to the lake. Just went for a drive on a beautiful day, and decided just to basically take Lakeshore Road and head back towards Toronto from Hamilton all the way back, and just cutting into every street that was closer to the lake just to see what's going on, and some fabulous, beautiful homes and properties there, and lots of activity out there. You can see there's a different lifestyle out there, much more active. Like people are out biking and jogging and walking, and dogs everywhere, and things like that, and lots of condo development. It's interesting to see, but not a ton of signs, out there for sale, and a lot of this stuff is higher end too. So there's a lot more activity when you get further away from the lake and you get into, to more moderate pricing and then lower pricing. There's more activity. The high end stuff is really not moving fast.
Yeah, to me, that's always a key indicator, David, because people that are upper middle class and people that, have money on the lake, it's always interesting to see what they're doing with their money, right? And if there's a lot of turnover in those neighborhoods and you see a lot of for sale signs, that's always an indicator that, something's really happening that we have to really pay attention to, right? But the fact that they're banking their money and they're not selling real estate, that's, part of the issue of why our market is where it is, because there's no inventory out there. But
Right.
especially like the people that have money, they're even more adverse to actually selling and listing right now. And they're buying in a big way, and they're holding. And that's what we're seeing. So it's actually a really interesting comment that you made about, not seeing for sale signs along Lakeshore in Burlington and Oakville, because you're absolutely right. There's very few.
Well, and the other factor in there, it's what COVID has taught us. It's lifestyle choices in where you're going to live and type of property. So those people are already at a property that has a backyard and has some nice land component to it. They're spread out a little bit. They can get outside, and they have access to the parklands and the bike paths and the things down the lake, so they can actually get out of the house. And there's a lot of value in that we've all learned because of COVID. So they're sitting on the more coveted types of properties right now and don't feel the same necessity to move because they weren't cramped during COVID. They had some space. It's the people that were more living in the smaller areas and the smaller lots and everything that have been looking to find larger land properties to live on, to have a little bit more space, to have a proper backyard, things like that. And they're the ones that are spreading out into the suburbs and the surrounding areas, because being in the heart of the city became so expensive.
100%. 100%. So today is a really interesting topic, and today we're talking about title insurance. So David, what is title insurance?
Well, when you buy a title to a property, you're buying legal ownership to a property. That's what you're buying. When we used to close transactions in a pre-title insurance world, a lawyer's opinion would be provided to the buyer after we searched title and we closed the transaction that you bought good and marketable title to the property. In a title insurance world, we're now reporting to them that you bought good and insurable property, good and insurable title. So there's a little bit of a difference because I remember when title insurance started, and I'm not sure the exact date, but it was around 1990. And so I actually grew up in the world in practice law before title insurance. And lawyers, we would have to do certain searches. We'd have to send letters to the municipality to find out what the property taxes are, get a tax certificate. We'd have to write to the building department, the zoning department, send them a copy of the survey of the property so they can review it and tell us if the property, the house located on the survey complies with all the setbacks and the bylaws, and if there's any infractions, and the update survey would show if there's encroachments and things like that. And the title insurers came along, and it's sort of ingenious, and they found a way to just grab a market share away from a bunch of people. Because they said, look, instead of you paying money to the city to tell you about the property tax, instead of you sending $100, or it might have been $80 or $50 at the time, but it's $100 now, to the city for a tax certificate, don't bother, just buy a policy from us and we'll provide you with insurance that the property taxes are paid and up to date. If not, we'll fight the battle and make sure they get paid. And don't bother getting an up-to-date survey and spending $1,000 or $1,500 getting an up-to-date survey, which is what you would need to send to the building department. Instead, save that money. Don't even bother doing your search. Don't even send a letter to the city of Toronto. You don't have to send a letter to the building department. You save $100. Don't send a letter to the zoning department. You'll save $100. And we will just provide a title insurance policy to confirm, to protect them that there's no issues. You don't have to search to see if there's work orders against the property. If the buyer finds out at some point after closing that there's work orders, we'll pay to fix up that problem after closing. So instead of spending $400 or $500 to give to the city and spending $1,000, $1,500 to a surveyor, they're saying instead buy a policy from us for $500 or whatever the cost was, and we'll provide you with protection. And with insurance, it's all a numbers game. So they know that a certain percentage, a high percentage, they're not going to have to pay anything. They're just collecting the premiums because there aren't any issues, or those issues won't surface. Yeah. And for those that do surface, they have a budget and they have a pool of money, and they'll pay to clean up those problems. So it was sort of ingenious. And they also said, by the way, I don't know what your lawyer was charging. Your lawyer back in those days, 30 years ago, was probably charging close to $1,000. I think that we were charging about $1,000 in legal fees to close a transaction. The legal fees went from that to about $300 to $400 for a lawyer, because it was, hey, lawyer, you don't have to do some of these searches anymore. You don't have to pay a clerk to send all these letters and follow up to get these responses from them. We're going to do some of that. We're taking that away from you. Therefore, you charge less. So they weren't doing any great favors at the time for the legal profession. There was a lot of angst in our profession that they're just trying to muscle in on us. Because in effect, that's what they did. They muscled in on our legal fees. They muscled in on the revenues that the municipalities were getting from doing these searches. They muscled in on work that surveyors were getting, and everybody's buying title insurance policies. So they've had a lot of flack over the years. In the meantime, it's been about 30 years, and we're all realizing there's a lot of benefits to title insurance too. And we've all evolved, and I think I'm a big supporter of title insurance. So I don't want to sound like I'm just giving a history lesson on it. And at the time, there was lots of people in our profession that were against it. It basically reduced our fees in half at the time, or less, because we were doing less on the files. So we were getting a policy, so we're certifying that, or giving an opinion they have good and insurable title as opposed to good and marketable title, because we weren't doing all the searches. So how's that for a history lesson?
Wow, it's quite extensive, and it's interesting to see the evolution, right? And I think you nailed it, because one of my questions is going to be, this system wouldn't make sense if there were a lot of issues, when you're searching bylaws and you're searching deficiencies in work orders. Like if every single transaction you closed had a work order deficiency or some sort of infraction or wasn't compliant with bylaws, this wouldn't make sense. It wouldn't make sense to do it this way, where you're basically saying that the title is insurable, but not good and marketable, right? Because then the insurance companies would have a huge headache rectifying all these issues. But I think if you were to look at the industry average and say, 99.9%, and I'm just throwing out a number out there, David, correct me, because you would have way more experience than I would in terms of saying what the percentage of issues that arise in residential transaction is when it comes to those things that title insurance protects you. But if the numbers didn't make sense, then there wouldn't be a business model here. But because the numbers were so few and far between where there were issues, right? Somebody looked at this and said, well, why is the legal profession doing all this work? And why are we waiting for the municipality to respond to 500,000 inquiries into, does this house comply with zoning? We know it does. Permits were obtained when the house was built. It was inspected. Somebody went over there, a surveyor measured, like it's the house has been standing for 30 years. There's never really been a complaint, right?
Right.
So why don't we look at this in a completely different way and solve this issue by providing insurance? And I agree with you, David. I think, at the beginning, it was probably tough on the industry, but the evolution has been such that, probably now title insurance is the single biggest piece in closing a transaction and having peace of mind that if something happens down the line, and we're talking about really big issues like encroachment or title issues, title fraud. These are really big issues if they do occur, that protect the buyer and the lender.
Yeah, that's true. And it's lenders too. Lenders accepted. That's a great point, David, because lenders accepted this a long time ago, that either get me an up-to-date survey and then send a municipality to make sure that everything complies, or we don't need a survey at all if you get title insurance. So you don't have to spend money on the survey. You don't have to check for work orders. You don't have to check for anything. Because the beauty of title insurance is it protects a buyer, it protects a lender from defects that they don't know about at the time that they close the transaction. So the title insurance saying, close your transaction. You see a house, okay? And let's just use a house that's been around for a long time in the middle of the city of Toronto or in the middle of Mississauga or anywhere. It's been there for a long time. Your agent takes you, go look at the house, and you like the front porch. It's really neat. You can see yourself hanging out there. It's got a deck in the back that you think would be great for a barbecue. It's got some fencing back there, and they're buying what they see and they want to live there. So we don't bother to see, was the deck built lawfully? Was there a permit issued for the deck? Is there a work order against it? Is the porch built the way it's supposed to? Is it the code? Does it comply with the setbacks? We don't have to make those inquiries, because if we do make those inquiries, it turns out that the porch is too big and it infringes on the setback. Well, now we got to get rid of the porch. We got to build it back and make it comply. The deck was built without a permit, and let's say, or it encroaches on. Well, we got to remove the deck. Well, now they don't want the house, right? It changes your use and your feel for the house. Now, the fact is, there's very few that are actually built without permits and have work orders against, which is why title insurance companies can play the game. It's a percentage game. But from a buyer's point of view and everything, people can buy what they see and feel confident in what they see. So let's say they buy that house. We get title insurance. We don't know if there's a work order. We don't know if there's any outstanding permits or something. And then something comes up, a neighbor complains, or a neighbor gets a survey and it turns out the back deck is encroaching on their property, or their fence encroaching, and an issue comes up. So then the title insurance company kicks in to deal with the problem. Okay. And what's interesting about a solution that title insurance comes up with, the solution isn't always to rebuild the deck or take it away because it no longer be used. Sometimes a settlement is reached and they say, you can just keep it, and maybe we need an encroachment agreement, and we'll negotiate that with the neighbor. they'll provide a policy to the next buyer. So their solution sometimes to the current owner is keep what you have. When you sell the property to someone else, and the issue comes up again, we'll provide a title insurance policy to the next buyer to insure over this issue. So we're never going to fix this issue. We're never going to correct it because everybody is happy with this defect. So sometimes the solution is let's leave the defect because everybody likes it, and we'll just provide an insurance policy over it. And because down the road, maybe someone will no longer want it and want it fixed, but we don't have to fix it until someone really wants us to fix it. So it's sort of an interesting way that they find a solution to it.
Yeah, and I mean, everything, I'm a firm believer that if you put two heads together, you can find a solution to any problem out there, right? And I think this is no exception here. And it's a very interesting way of solving issues, right? Negotiating with the neighbor, coming up with an encroachment agreement, maybe paying them some sort of a compensation for the encroachment. But the object here is to make sure that everybody's happy and to make sure that things can proceed as is.
Yeah, and the key is looking carefully at what they cover and what they don't cover, and like there's no cover for like environmental issues or something like that if you're on a property, and commercial transactions are dealt with differently. Like in our firm, 100% of residential transactions we close have title insurance. Okay, if a client does not want to have title insurance, we always explain to them the benefits of title insurance. If they choose not to, we're not going to do it. We're going to pass on it, let somebody else do it. To me, it just does not make sense for anybody to close a residential transaction without title insurance right now. It's going to cost them more money. There's more exposure to them. There's more risk to them. And so the benefits outweigh the risks. So we explain that to them. So we end up like 100% in residential, we're doing title insurance. Commercial transactions, the majority of them these days, we're actually getting commercial title insurance policies. For a long time, I think we were more in the 50-50 range because there's certain benefits, a lot of times we're doing a lot of the searches anyways. There's reasons for us to make those inquiries on commercial transactions. Sometimes we make some of those inquiries, but we're still getting title insurance because it covers certain issues.
Errors and omissions.
Yeah, and one of the things you touched on it briefly, one of the big advantages of title insurance is that there is fraud protection. And that's something that we couldn't protect anybody in a pre-title insurance world. When we were just doing our searches and providing our title opinions, we couldn't protect them for future fraud issues that come up. But one of the things, and it's one of the key selling features of title insurance, is that they do give owners and lenders fraud protection. So if somebody in the future steals your identity, a buyer's identity, and tries to sell their property or put a mortgage on their property fraudulently, their title insurance policy will cover for them, and they'll jump in, they'll protect them, they'll pay their legal fees for defending their title, they'll go to court, they'll do whatever they got to do to chase it down, and they'll pay out the amount to protect the lender, to protect the homeowner. So there was no coverage for that in a pre-title insurance world. So to me, like, that's a huge benefit of title insurance.
Yeah, and I mean, we purchased a commercial building where our brokerage is residing, and we had an issue with a sign on our front lawn.
Yep.
The previous owner applied for a sign permit, and it came to our attention that there was no permit in place. We got served with a notice from the city. And David, I approached your office and we talked about it, and we thought about title insurance on our commercial property when we bought the building. And sure enough, Stewart Title was covered the issue. The sign was removed. We had a company come pour new foundations. We had it inspected. We had a new sign erected, and the whole aspect was covered by title insurance. So, when you're buying a commercial property, there's so many different aspects to it, and just having that protection. And I mean, this came 3 years after we purchased the property, came to our attention that there was no permit for the sign that we had in the front lawn. So
Right.
It just gives you the ultimate example of how you can utilize your title insurance company to your benefit.
Right. And that's a great example. So if we didn't have title insurance at the time, we would have written to the city to see if there's any outstanding work orders. At the time, there may not have been an outstanding work order because no one had noticed the sign. The sign was built without a permit. No one would have noticed it.
Yep.
So we would have gotten a letter back from the city saying, no, everything's good. And there's no outstanding work orders, unless they send somebody to inspect them. They don't always do that. Like we're asking, our inquiry is for any existing work orders. Is there anything on record? Any outstanding open work permits or anything like that? We're not inviting them out to inspect. That's not part of the process. So we never would have known about it. And then 3 years later, all of a sudden, as it happens, an inspector says, hey, that sign doesn't look right. They happen to see it and they check into it. And there's no work or no permit issued, they issue a work order, and you're stuck with that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was something you didn't know about and you got no coverage for it. So, it's a great example. And I don't know do you have an idea what the overall cost was to the title insurance company to fix the issue?
It wasn't substantial. It was a couple $1,000s, but for me, it was great because we hired a professional company and we installed a great sign. We installed metal footings and we replaced the whole sign with a really substantial metal frame sign. And, we really went all out and the whole cost was covered by title insurance, which was great.
Right. So they probably paid out more than what their policy was at the time, or I don't remember what the cost of policy was, but that's a great example. And we've had examples of title insurance companies stepping up to pay for things that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars,
right.
As well, and they're prepared to do it. That's part of the game. If there's a legitimate claim, they pay out. And what I've found, personally in our firm, like you mentioned Stewart Title Insurance, fabulous title insurance company. We deal with First Canadian Title Insurance. We deal with Chicago Title. To some extent, we've got fabulous relationships with all of them. And what we've found with them is, because we're obviously our firm is dealing with a lot of policies. We're a really good source of business for them with the volume of transactions that we do. So they actually pay attention to us. So when we say we got a problem here, we get really good service from them. They take it seriously. And we really do find with those companies, they're not looking to get out of the policy. They're looking to find a way to cover it. They're not looking for the loophole to get them out of the policy. They're trying to go through policy to see how they can cover it. And if it doesn't quite fit this coverage, maybe it'll fit this coverage. And that's been our experience. And I think it's partly because of the volumes we do with them in our relationship. But our experience with them is when our clients have an issue, they're looking to find coverage, not looking to get out of coverage. And I think I've mentioned this to you in the past too, that we've experienced with Stewart and with First Canadian Title, a few instances where they've analyzed and they said there isn't any coverage. We looked at this top to bottom. We've been trying to find it. There isn't coverage, but we're prepared to do something anyways. We're prepared to kick something in anyways to help out your client. And they've actually done that when they had no obligation to do it. Not 100% coverage or anything like that, but they've kicked in somewhere to help find a solution and to provide advice on how to fix a problem. So that's invaluable. And that goes to relationships. And you and I talk about that all the time.
All the time. And
right?
I was actually just about to mention it again.
Right.
It's such an important topic of discussion. And I talk about relationships all the time with my realtors, right? And it's always the same case. You never need an amazing lawyer until you need a lawyer, right? Because again, a lot of these transactions will close without any issues. But when you need a lawyer, you really need a lawyer, and you need a great lawyer that's going to take the time, discuss the issue, give you a workable solution, and really work with you to really stay on top of all these issues, right? And title insurance is really no exception and really fits into that mold as well. And when you're working with an A-level law firm like Kormans, that extends to your relationships with the people that you guys do business with. Right.
Right.
And clients leverage those relationships.
Right. And, and I appreciate those comments. And that's what we talk about. Like, we're always working together. We're a team. It's important for us to have a relationship with the agents. It's important for us to understand the agents know way more about the clients than we do. So some of the information that you're giving us really helps us too, because our standard answer would be, do you need a survey for this property? Do you need an updated survey? And our answer would be, no, you don't, because we're going to get title insurance and we're going to close that way. So something we don't want to know if there's defects to the problem. We'd rather close. If something comes up afterwards, we'd rather have the title insurance coverage. But on the other hand, if the agent happens to say to us, oh, they bought this property, it's got a big backyard and they really want to put a pool in, or they want to do some major landscaping, and they want to, or put a sports court in, or they're going to do something, then we were starting to think about, well, maybe we do want to get a survey, or at some point they're going to be getting a survey. So we want to at least, it's important for us to have information like that sometimes about what the intended use of a property is, to determine whether or not our advice to them ultimately was, don't bother getting a survey, and we don't want to check anything out. Let's just close, get title insurance, and deal with it afterwards. Okay. But, we work hand in hand as a team. So, there's a lot of information that agents get that it's nice to have that relationship, because a lot of times, agents actually call me, or get in touch and say, hey, I've got something I want to send to you. Really nice people. I want to introduce you to them. This is what they're looking to buy, and I'm referring to you. And it's great to have that conversation sometimes, as opposed to just, we get an email with a copy of the agreement of purchase and sale. Can you act on the closing? So, we know nothing about the people. We know nothing about what they want to do with the property at that point in time. So we got to get in touch, try and ask some key questions, right? But because for the most part, we don't need an up-to-date survey. We're going to close with title insurance. We don't need to make those inquiries. There's certain instances where it might make sense to do it.
And you'd think, David, that surveyors would have a lot less work on their hands, but that is the furthest from the truth. One of my really good friends happens to be a surveyor, and the poor guy works 7 days a week and 20 hours a day, right? Because he's the only one that has the ultimate stamp, and he needs to oversee personally every single survey that goes out from his office. And the amount of liability and attention to detail that surveyors have is astronomical. And I was actually told that there's almost no schools in all of Canada that teach people how to become a surveyor. So it's a dying craft. Yes. But they're still busier now than they've ever been before in their career.
Yeah, the ones that are doing it are extremely busy. Hard to get a hold of. So obviously the prices have gone up, and what they charge to do it. They keep historical records of all the properties too. So I'm always telling people, if we do need to you want to get a survey updated, or if you want to find out if there's a survey, we got to find out if there was, who was the surveyor 20 years ago or 30 years ago that looked at this, or maybe did an old survey, or did the neighbor's survey, because the neighbor had got a survey, they would be looking at your property as well. So the logical person to look up is that surveyor, because they would have historical records of all this, and they keep that, and they can update, as opposed to doing a survey from brand new. So there's still huge value in what a surveyor does. And anybody that is going to be putting new fencing on their property, or landscaping along the borders of their property, or putting a pool in, or a sports court, or anything like that, needs a surveyor. Anybody that's doing an addition to their property and some major renovations, they've got to check it out. So they still go through that process getting a surveyor. Now, when they get a survey done, and that survey happens to reveal certain problems, there's a shed in the backyard that happens to be 2 feet onto the neighbor's property, or the neighbor's shed is on your property. Now we got an issue, and now there should be coverage to fix that issue, because we didn't know about that issue at the time the transaction closed, and there was title insurance coverage for it. So now we find out about the issue, and there's coverage for it. Just like your sign issue, you find out after the fact, but you've got coverage for it, and then you're given various options about how to remedy the problem.
Yeah.
And not at your expense.
Yeah. And David, all this comes back to, again, working with somebody that can really help you navigate all these situations. Title insurance is great because it protects you, right? And it protects you after the transaction closes. Now, it's my understanding that when title insurance is purchased, it protects you for the life that you own the property. So even if you own the property 40, 50, 60 years, you have that protection for the whole time you own the property.
Right. That's a great point. At the time you close a transaction, you buy a title insurance policy. So you're getting an owner's policy. And at the same time, there'll be a policy issued to your lender. So your owner's policy, you're paying a premium at that time. And it's a one-time premium. You never have to pay another premium. It's not like other types of insurance, not like your other home insurance and your car insurance you're paying on an annual basis. The premiums don't go up, nothing changes. It's a one-time cost. If you own the property for 20 years or 40 years, you don't have, your coverage continues based on that one policy that you bought. Okay. Now your lender's policy will expire when you refinance the property. If you go to if you had a policy with one bank and 3 years later your mortgage is up and you go and get a new mortgage from a different lender, you're going to be buying a lender policy again at that point in time, because that and it's the owner of the property that pays for the lender's policy too. So you might be paying for title insurance for your lender during the course of your ownership if you have a mortgage on the property, but your homeowner's policy is paid for once and that's it.
Gotcha.
One-time premium.
What happens when title is transferred to a spouse or to surviving children?
Well, that's a good question, because sometimes we go back to the title insurance company to see if they extend coverage to it. If it's a title transfer between spouses, or it could have been like one spouse on title, they want to add another spouse, or there was two on, they want to take one off for whatever reason. Generally, the answer we get back is the coverage will continue, because they really consider it the same owners. Okay. If they're transferring it down to another generation or something like that, they take a look at it. So, but there's ways of doing that too, because if we're adding someone to the title, let's say it's, a husband and wife own it and they want to, for estate planning purposes, they want to add their children to the title, add them as joint tenants. So if they died, their children would be the survivors, not going to get it. Sometimes the policy will extend to them. They're just adding them to an existing title. Okay, so we don't have to pay a premium, but we look into that at the time to see if there's coverage, to make sure there's coverage.
Awesome. Let's talk about a couple things that is not covered by title insurance. Can you give me an idea of what wouldn't be covered? I know we talked about environmental issues. Yeah,
environmental issues is not covered. Now, there aren't a lot of environmental issues that come up on residential properties, but there are a lot of properties that historically had oil tanks. You see it still in a lot of rural properties and cottage properties where it's, the heating was from oil tanks. They might have been underground tanks. So there are potential environmental issues that you have to deal with some properties. So that's not something that they would typically cover. The big thing that they do not cover, if there's any known defects. So if at the time of closing, if you knew about a defect, you knew there was a work order, you knew there was an encroachment, if you had knowledge of it, and then you close the transaction, title insurance is not going to cover it. So that's why I say we don't make those inquiries. We'd rather not know if there's problems. We'd rather close the deal. And if we happen to find out after closing that there was a problem that existed prior to closing, you have coverage for it. But once we have knowledge of a defect, like if we know before closing that there's a work order in a property, we have to bring that to the attention of the title insurance company, and they will exclude that from their policy. Okay, so known defects.
The seller in that case would be responsible for rectifying it before closing, right? Which, I mean,
right.
The issue there would be that there'd be delays, there'd be estimates, there'd be holdbacks, there'd be, different things that we would have to work together collectively to rectify the issue before closing takes place.
Right.
With title insurance, yes, we know that the buyer is protected, but all these things would happen after the transaction closes, I guess.
Right. And it doesn't prevent you from closing. The stuff can all be dealt with. And sometimes the solution is that physically nothing will be done, because we'll just insure over it and everybody's happy to leave it. But if you find out there's a work order prior to closing, we send a letter to the seller's lawyer saying, get rid of this work order. Right. So they've got to get an inspector back in, maybe everything's been looked at, but they hadn't re-inspected. So you got to get an inspector in, it's subject to their availability, and then they got to write a report. It creates delays in closings. So because we can't close, or like you said, we might have to start negotiating holdbacks of amount from closing proceeds to make sure the work order gets removed after closing and things like that. So it certainly complicates transactions. It certainly delays transactions because it has to be cleaned up. The same existing work order, if we didn't know about it at time of closing, you find out about it 5 years later, and the answer might be to clean it up, and the answer might be, no, it's not bothering anybody. We're going to leave it as it is. And we're just going to, the title insurance company will just provide a policy to the next buyer too. And we're not going to remedy that. And for me as a lawyer, that was a tough concept to grasp 30 years ago when it's like, what do you mean you're not going to clean up these issues? What do you mean you're not going to fix, certain title problems or encroachment issues or work orders? You're not going to, if there's outstanding tax, you're not going to clean it up. Like you're just going to ignore it and just live there. And it's, to some degree, that's the answer. And that's because in certain circumstances, that's a better solution than to fix the problems, which is sort of a weird thing when you think about it, but they'd rather live in the house with that beautiful deck in the back than have it torn down.
Yeah, and some of these houses have stood the test of time. Some of these Victorian houses in Toronto, I mean, they're hundreds of years old, and they're more solid today than some of the new construction that we see using plywood and MDMF and not even real wood products, right? So you're right. It's one of those feelings that's we feel torn between, do you fix the issue now, or do you have insurance and protect everybody and insure over top and continue kind of living with the status quo, right? But there's certainly protection for the buyer here, which is the most important thing. And there's a way to navigate through these situations.
Yeah, and just to finish the answer that I was giving you about things that are excluded, the other thing that's excluded is anything that the buyer does to the property.
Right.
So, and there's a lot of situations come out where the buyer does something after closing. Maybe the buyer builds the deck, or the buyer fixes the porch and extends it out, a few inches, and now they're offside with the setback. They got too close to a neighbor's property or something like that. And a lot of times buyers think, oh, if I did something and there's a work order is then issued, then I'll get coverage for it. But it doesn't work that way. If it was something that the current homeowner did during the time they own the property, there won't be coverage for that. So in your sign example, if you put up that sign, you would not have had cover. You put up an unlawful sign, you don't get coverage for it. The previous owner did, you didn't know about it at the time of closing. No knowledge, it works in your favor under this system, and therefore title insurance covers you.
Yeah. And it was a very smooth process. I mean, I want to ask you how how people can go about submitting a claim, but I mean, for us, I just reached out to the clerk that was on the transaction, and she communicated with the title company, asked me for a couple pieces of information, which I provided, and then it was as easy as that. But normally, David, how would you submit a claim for title insurance?
Well, that's basically it. You really start when there's an issue. You go back to the lawyer that acted for you, that helped arrange for the title insurance policy, like we did with you. And it's not a very difficult process at our end, because we're not going to be dealing with it. We're just trying to get the information in the hands of the title insurance company, saying, here's the story, here's the property, here's your policy, here's the issue, this is whatever docs you have, and then we'd hand it over to them. And then anything else they're going to need from our file, that's going to be our role, just to give them whatever else they need. But once we put it in their hands, their claims department is really good at just jumping on it and acting quickly. And, they know what they're going to need. And some of it they're going to be getting from you as the owner. Some of it they might need from our file, from our searches, or from whatever information we have. And once it's in their hands, they run with it. And we have very little to do with it from that point on. Once we make the contact and put the the policy owner in touch with the title insurance companies. Because like I'm saying, these title insurance companies, like, they're really good, and they're very good at processing claims, and they react quickly, and I think they're great, and they're not trying to throw anybody under the bus and putting blame anywhere. They're actually looking what the situation is, and they're very solution oriented. How can we fix this for them? How can we give the owners of our policies some coverage? So that's really refreshing, because I know we've all had experiences with insurance companies over the years for other types of insurance, and it's always like, how can I get out of covering under this policy? Where can I find a loophole, an exception, so I don't have to pay out, right? So it's nice to know that they really try to work the other way, because it's in their interest. They love putting out a story of how they covered somebody. And they've got the money to do it, because the percentage are so in their favor of not having to pay out on a policy.
David, you have to stop living in my head. Every single time I'm like, okay, I'm going to talk about something, right? But it's true. I mean, they have that ability and that approach because of the amount of claims that they get, or lack of, right? I mean, if the amount of claims rose up a certain percentage, I can guarantee you that they'd be looking at it very differently, right? But because there's not a lot of claims out there, the few claims that they do get, they're happy to really go to bat to show the benefit of really having title insurance coverage and protecting and the product that they're selling, right? So I think it's great. It's nice to actually have that kind of approach from an insurance company. And the other thing that we haven't really touched on is the fact that there's no deductible coverage.
That's true. There's no deductible on this. There's nothing. And not only are they covering you for the cost of fixing the problem and dealing with the municipality or whatever they got to do, if they have to do a severance, if they have to do an application to get a variance to permit something that was encroaching, or a variance in the setback, whatever those costs are, they're eating those costs as part of the solution, including the legal costs, for hiring lawyers to act on it and do it and go to court if necessary. So it's complete coverage that way. Yeah. So it's there's a lot of benefits to it.
Does the client have to pay the costs up front and they reimburse, or do they cover all the costs from?
They will review it, and they'll determine, once they determine that it's something that they're covering, then they're looking after everything. There's nothing, the only thing they need from the homeowner is certain information, certain details that they have or their lawyer has about the transaction, and to complete their forms and get the whole history. But they're not laying out any money for it. Everything is being covered by the title insurance company once they had determined that they're covering.
Amazing. And David, in your experience, how long does a typical claim take? Like, are they quick to react? Are they quick to logistically navigate? Because I mean, sometimes when it's a big issue and they have to coordinate with surveyors, lawyers, the township, engineers, do they go through that process rather quickly?
Well, yeah, my experience is they do go through it rather quickly. It depends on the nature of the issue. For example, property taxes is one of the things that's covered. So we don't have to write to get a certificate from municipality as to confirm that the 2021 property taxes have been paid to date. We can rely on information that the vendor and the vendor's lawyer is telling us that, yeah, I paid my tax bill, and then we adjust based on that. If it turns out they didn't, and there was a few hundred outstanding or a few thousand outstanding, we would write to the other lawyer saying, hey, your taxes weren't paid, fix this in a week, or we're going to give it to title insurance. So if they don't, we just hand it over to title insurance. So title insurance will pay the outstanding taxes immediately to protect the homeowner, so they're not incurring penalties and interest, and then they'll go chase the seller for it. And more often than not, they'll end up collecting from them if they can find. Occasionally, there might be an absconding seller that they can't collect from, and that's a cost of doing business to the title insurance company. So they're reacting like quickly, boom, 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 like it's going to be done. They're going to lay out that money right away to give to the municipality and make sure the property taxes are paid, and then they'll go chase it down afterwards. So something like that is an easy response. I've been involved with some. I had a client who bought a property in Mississauga. It was actually 2 lots that were put together at one point. And one they had a big, huge home on. The other house had a swimming pool and a sports court and cabanas and tennis court. Like, it was beautiful property. Turns out a lot of it was encroaching on conservation lands and done without permits and
Wow.
things like that. So, when that became apparent, there was no problem. Our client, living there, moving in, using it, enjoying it. We got title insurance coverage to go through and deal with it all. And there was a certain confidence level that municipality was not going to make them undo everything or take it away. We knew that there was an issue with the retaining wall against the conservation lands, and a big cost would have to be done to build that up and get proper permits to do that. And that was sort of the focus, but they insured over the whole thing. So it probably took 4 or 5 years for the thing to get completely resolved and settled. But the homeowner never felt any of that. They just moved in and lived there and enjoyed their swimming pool and tennis court and everything. And everything was done around them. And that one took a lot of time because there were certain variances that had to be applied for and dealt with, and which ultimately were succeeded in doing and getting building permits and beefing up the retaining wall and then getting it re-inspected and things like that. But it didn't affect the homeowner's use of the property, which was great. Amazing. And then before it was even resolved, the homeowner sold the property.
Wow.
And we said to the potential buyer, here's our title insurance coverage for it. And here's the undertaking of the title insurance company to follow this right through. And it was transferable to the next owner. And we got their lawyer in touch with the title insurance company. They got confirmation. They got a new policy issued to the new buyer, and the policy and all that coverage continued for the next buyer.
Amazing.
So it was a great example of how it works.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain level of confidence that's instilled in not only the new buyer but also the old buyer as well. Because you buy a property, and even though you always assume that everything's done correctly, I think when you go through this process of obtaining permits, of making sure that everything's done 100,000% correctly, and when you're dealing with conservation, when you're dealing with retaining walls and permits and beefing them up, that they're not going to take any chances, and it's all going to be done 100% correctly. You have an engineer, you have an environmental assessment company, you have all these different departments and all these different professionals working together to make sure that you have a first-class solution. And I think as a buyer or as a property owner, to me, I would want to know that there's no expense spared and it gets done correctly, right? And a lot of the times, if you're a homeowner by yourself going through this process, are you really going to hire an environmental company to come and do an assessment? Are you really going to hire the best engineering company to do everything for you the way it's supposed to do? Or are you going to hire an engineering company that says, well, you know what, we could probably get away with this, right? Whereas, when you're going through this process with title insurance, everything's going to be dealt with 100%.
Right, and they did, and it was all done thoroughly with proper professionals. And can you imagine what this transaction would have been like if we weren't using title insurance and we were making inquiries and found out that there were all these defects and there were problems and there weren't proper permits issued and there was issues like this? Like, there's no way this transaction would have closed, or what's the appropriate undertaking to get on closing? What's the appropriate holdback? We don't know what the potential costs are. So, obviously this is a multi-million-dollar property, but still, how much are you holding back on closing to make sure that it's going to get fixed? And in what time frame is it going to get fixed after closing, and who's going to fix it? And the buyer's in the business. He wants to move in and live there. He didn't want to move in and deal with engineers and surveyors and contractors and the municipality and the region and the conservation authority. He wanted to be a homeowner. Yeah. It turns out this was an NHL
conservation authority. When I hear that word in residential real estate, the hair on the back of my neck stands up, because these guys are extremely difficult to deal with, and they're difficult to deal with because they rely on certain expert reports, and these expert reports just cost an insane amount of money to produce, right? And for the average person, it's extremely difficult to deal with just because of the deep pockets you need to have. You need this report, you need that report, you need this report. Then after you get all these reports, they need more reports. And it could cost hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through the whole process to ensure that everybody's protected.
Yeah, and there's a peace of mind process to this too. Like, sometimes people are in the frame of mind where they're buying a property and they're planning to do a renovation and they're prepared to do all that and they're prepared to take that on and live through that. Sometimes, like in this example, this was an NHL hockey player who was, this is, his home away, when he's not, traveling the world to play hockey, and want to come back to it. He doesn't want to come back and deal with all this stuff. He wanted to come back and use his backyard and swim in his pool and play tennis and have parties and do his thing. So he would not have been in the right frame of mind to take this on and deal with all this stuff post closing and have the burden of it. And he didn't have to. He had the peace of knowing this was all going to be covered and all going to be protected, and he could just go about his business and deal with it. So, really pleased that we had title insurance in place for him as part of this process, and that we didn't have knowledge of all these issues, going into it.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great product, and it's great to know what it covers, what it doesn't cover, and some of the details that we talked about today. And I think it really provides a lot of benefits to the industry and to homeowners.
Yeah, it does. And I'm sure there's a topic that we'll come back to again, because there's great examples of things that we can talk about, where title insurance got involved and what they did. And maybe we'll even get a representative or two of these title insurance companies to come on and tell some great stories. And they have got great insight in this too, and can explain the benefits of their coverage better than I can. But we certainly appreciate their efforts and our relationship with them. And it's so I'm glad you brought this up as a topic for today, David. It's a good one.
It's a great one. And David, I'm really looking forward to next week, because next week I think we're going to start a 2-part series talking about pre-construction. And this has been a topic and a trend that's really prevalent in our industry. There's a lot of buyers really jumping into the pre-construction world, and a lot of agents are transacting more and more with pre-construction. So I'm really looking forward to this topic, and there's lots to talk about as well.
Lots to talk about. So it might be a 12-hour podcast.
Yeah, seriously. Well, I'm looking forward to it. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe out there, and buy lots of real estate.
Yeah. Stay safe, everybody, and get out there. There's lots of opportunities. Get in touch with David Gorski at Sutton Summit. He's got a great team there.
Yeah, we'll put you in touch with the right realtor to help you navigate. And again, my message is, especially if you own multiple properties, I would consider selling one and taking some risk off the market. It's a great time to sell. If you're looking to buy, there is a lot of opportunities out there as well, especially outside of the GTA and in the pre-construction world as well. So give our office a call and we'll help you navigate.
Looking forward to next week's podcast already.
All right, Dave. See you then.
Thank you.
Welcome to David and David on Real Estate. Join us as we explore the ins and outs of the real estate market and dive deep to understand the issues affecting buyers, sellers, investors, and businesses. If you love real estate as much as we do, sit back, relax, and gain an insider's edge to the exciting world of real estate. David Gorski is a broker and the owner of Sutton Summit Realty, a powerhouse brokerage providing guidance to over 180 realtors. And David Korman is a partner at Kormans LLP, a respected law firm specializing in residential and commercial real estate transactions, with offices located in Toronto, Mississauga, and Markham.